Ideme to rozbaliť. 367. deň. Karolina bola potkaná.
At any time in human history. Why exactly are we at war with Russia? It seems like there's a pretty significant downside to this particular foreign policy decision, starting with economic collapse and ending potentially with extinction. So is there a good reason we're doing it? So many innocent young people have been killed. So many hundreds of billions of dollars have been wasted, some of them from the U.S. Treasury. So what's the point? Are we really doing this so the Biden family can repay its debts to the oligarchs who financed their beach house in Rehoboth? Are we doing it so our government can continue to lie about its illicit biolabs in Eastern Europe? So that flabby losers like Toria Nuland and Tony Blinken can feel like they're doing something important with their sad, empty lives? Really? Honestly, there's got to be a better reason for waging this, the most pointless war of all. What is it? Well, thankfully, we have an answer. The war against Russia, ladies and gentlemen, the war against Putin and for Ukraine is in fact a war for democracy. Watch and recall the motive.
The President has said many times we're focused on what we can do to support Ukraine's effort to fight for their democracy.
Democracy must prevail. The Ukrainian people are fighting the fight for their democracy and in doing so for ours as well.
Assisting and helping Ukraine win this fight for democracy and freedom.
And of course, Ukrainian President Zelensky understands that what's at stake in Ukraine is bigger than just his nation. It is literally a battle for freedom and democracy themselves.
They are showing the world what an existential fight for democracy looks like.
President Zelensky and the Ukrainians have changed the course of history for the better, and we unequivocally are with the Ukrainian people in their fight to remain a sovereign democracy.
Unequivocally with the Ukrainian people to remain a democracy. It's a bipartisan view. Democracy must prevail. You just heard noted democracy expert Nancy Pelosi say, the daughter of the mobbed-up mayor of Baltimore. As Pelosi puts it, the Ukrainian people are fighting the fight for their democracy and for ours as well. That's right, for ours as well. Without Ukrainian democracy, in other words, we can have no democracy here. If the Ukrainians aren't free, neither are we. We must make sure they can vote in Kiev so we can continue to vote in Kansas City. It's really that simple. And yet tonight, we regret to tell you that we have a problem. It looks like they're not going to be able to vote in Kiev anymore. And no, for once, it's not Putin's fault. Democracy in Ukraine seems to be suspended by the world's foremost democracy advocate himself, Field Marshal Zelensky. Watch this.
Чи будуть в Україні наступного року вибори?
Це ж питання глобальне. І якщо ми переможемо, то будуть. Значить, не буде військового часу, не буде війни. А вибори повинні проходити у мирний час, коли немає війни, згідно законодавства.
So when you have an election, well, he says if we win, we'll let people vote. Otherwise, no. You vote when we feel like it, because ultimately we're completely in charge and make all the rules. Your job is to obey or be punished. That's our version of self-government. Self means me. I'm the government. Now, that's not just any autocrat. That's our chief ally in the war for democracy. This is the guy who's announced he's likely to cancel next year's elections. So you've got to wonder what the Biden administration thinks of this. We can't possibly continue to support Zelensky, that guy, after he said that, can we? Because in a clip less than 30 seconds long, he just blew up our entire rationale for supporting his side in the war. So we can't support him. Oh, of course we can. And we will. Here's Joe Biden from yesterday reaffirming America's unequivocal support for Ukraine.
No matter what happened in Russia, we, the United States, will continue to support Ukraine's defense and its sovereignty and its territorial integrity.
So to recap, we are currently fighting a war for democracy on behalf of a leader who just casually announced he's happy to end democracy, and our democracy-supporting leaders have no problem with that. In fact, they're strongly for it. Shocked? You shouldn't be. Of course they're for it. You should have seen this coming. Wars for democracy always cancel democracy in the process. That's why our leaders love them. And they all do it, even the virtuous leaders. Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. The British government under Winston Churchill threw an entire opposition party into prison and let them rot for the duration, in some cases with their families. So in a war for democracy, you can do anything. Imagine what a man might do who has fewer principles. If that man, say, ran Ukraine, he might seize churches, arrest priests, ban all criticism of himself, disappear his political opponents. And that's happening. Just last month, Zelensky threw a man called Gonzalo Lira into prison indefinitely for the crime of daring to write about the Ukrainian government in unflattering ways. Now, what's interesting, what separates this from other such cases, is that Lira is an American citizen. So Joe Biden, who is quite a bit of SWAT, as they say in Ukraine, could have freed Gonzalo Lira within hours. But he didn't. He didn't want to. He didn't say a word about it. He remains in prison tonight. So that makes you wonder, what's the real motive here? When normal people see war, they see death and destruction, sadness and suffering. But that's not what demagogues see. They understand it differently. They know that war means power, mostly for them. During wartime, everything they do can be justified. War is the gravest of all emergencies. Imagine the COVID lockdowns times 1,000 plus drones. Once war breaks out, politicians become gods with the power of life and death. So in a peaceful democracy, you have to debate your political opponents in public, and that's tiresome. But in a war for democracy, you can just throw them in jail or have them executed. You can see that many in Washington are looking forward to that moment. And that may be why they so fervently support Joe Biden, even many Republicans, against a potential opponent, the only opponent who opposes the war in Ukraine. If you were to end the war, their power would evaporate. Last week, a whistleblower produced WhatsApp messages from Hunter Biden, proving that at the very least, his father knew about his influence peddling businesses abroad and probably participated in them. Quote, "I'm sitting here with my father," Hunter Biden wrote to his Chinese partners demanding money. As much as anything reported about the Bidens over the last several years, this was the smoking gun. There it is, right there, in the message. That would have been enough to cripple a normal president. It would have been more than enough to keep a normal president from running for office again. But it had virtually no effect on Joe Biden. Most media outlets ignored it completely or tried to spin Biden's relationship with his son as some kind of moral victory. Quote, "The real meaning of the Hunter Biden saga, as I see it," wrote Nick Kristof of the New York Times, "isn't about presidential corruption, but is about how widespread addiction is and about how a determined parent with unconditional love can sometimes reel a child back." He actually wrote that. And if you doubt it, you should know that view was common. Here's the take from ABC.
The Hunter Biden story, the scandal, the this, the
Destruction, sadness, and say a word. Just last month, Tea Party into prison and let them rot for the duration, in some cases with their families. So in a war for democracy, you can do anything. Imagine what a man might do who has fewer principles. If that man, say, ran Ukraine, he might seize churches, arrest priests, ban all criticism of himself, disappear his political opponents. And that's happening. Just last month, Zelensky threw a man called Gonzalo Lira into prison indefinitely for the crime of daring to write about the Ukrainian government in unflattering ways. Now, what's interesting, what separates this from other such cases, is that Lira is an American citizen. So Joe Biden, who is quite a bit of SWAT, as they say in Ukraine, could have freed Gonzalo Lira within hours. But he didn't. He didn't want to. He didn't say a word about it. He remains in prison tonight. So that makes you wonder, what's the real motive here? When normal people see war, they see death and destruction, sadness and suffering. But that's not what demagogues see. They understand it differently. They know that war means power, mostly for them. During wartime, everything they do can be justified. War is the gravest of all emergencies. Imagine the COVID lockdowns times 1,000 plus drones. Once war breaks out, politicians become gods with the power of life and death. So in a peaceful democracy, you have to debate your political opponents in public, and that's tiresome. But in a war for democracy, you can just throw them in jail or have them executed. You can see that many in Washington are looking forward to that moment. And that may be why they so fervently support Joe Biden, even many Republicans, against a potential opponent, the only opponent who opposes the war in Ukraine. If you were to end the war, their power would evaporate. Last week, a whistleblower produced WhatsApp messages from Hunter Biden, proving that at the very least, his father knew about his influence peddling businesses abroad and probably participated in them. Quote, "I'm sitting here with my father," Hunter Biden wrote to his Chinese partners demanding money. As much as anything reported about the Bidens over the last several years, this was the smoking gun. There it is, right there, in the message. That would have been enough to cripple a normal president. It would have been more than enough to keep a normal president from running for office again. But it had virtually no effect on Joe Biden. Most media outlets ignored it completely or tried to spin Biden's relationship with his son as some kind of moral victory. Quote, the real meaning of the Hunter Biden saga, as I see it, wrote Nick Kristof of the New York Times, isn't about presidential corruption, but is about how widespread addiction is, and about how a determined parent with unconditional love can sometimes reel a child back. He actually wrote that. And if you doubt it, you should know that view was common. Here's the take from ABC.
The Hunter Biden story, the scandal, the this, the that, it's also the story of a father's love. And Joe Biden has never and will never give up on his son Hunter, and will never treat him lesser than. And so he is a father first. Take it or leave it.
So a whistleblower produces a text message showing that Joe Biden was in the room with his son when his son was selling influence to an enemy power, the Chinese government. And ABC's take on it, Joe Biden is a father first. Take it or leave it. What accounts for a response like that? Well, that's the way you talk when you've got nothing to fear from an upcoming presidential election. You don't even bother to think of an excuse for your candidate because you don't need to. Your country has electronic voting machines. Joe Biden got 81,282,916 votes in 2020, and you're pretty sure he can do it again. In fact, you know he can. You're not worried. But actually, they should be a little worried. The people who control Joe Biden, Susan Rice, and the rest, know they can continue to run our government, writing the press releases, formulating the policies, and they can do it effectively forever, as long as Joe Biden gets dressed in the morning. And of course, that's their strong preference. These are fervent opponents of change. But the one thing these people cannot control is aging. Joe Biden is old. He's 80 now. He will be 85 at the end of the next term. People imagine that old age is a long, predictable progression from acuity to permanent unconsciousness. But often that's not at all how it actually works. When old people start to slide, they tend to slide fast. Joe Biden has begun that descent. Here he was yesterday.
And here's what she wrote to me, and I quote, "You can imagine my joy. She called them right away, and the next day they sent someone out to survey her yard. As Beth wrote, this is the best thing that's happened in rural America since the Rural Electrification Act brought electricity to farms in the 30s and 40s." End of quote.
End of quote. You weren't supposed to hear that. Joe Biden read the stage directions out loud. That's like eating the garnish that comes with your entree. You're supposed to know not to do that. Joe Biden no longer does. In a year or two, he will be gone completely, and there will be no hiding it. At that point, the Democratic Party will face a secession problem. If Joe Biden is reelected next year and then forced to leave office during his term due to disability or death, that means Kamala Harris will become president of the United States. And nobody wants that, not even her husband. In real life, nobody likes Kamala Harris. That's not an attack on her. In fact, it's possible to feel pity for someone who's so universally reviled. It is instead an observation of unchanging physical reality like gravity or photosynthesis. Nobody wants Kamala Harris to be president. No one will benefit if she becomes president. So logic suggests there's going to be a change. It's going to have to be somebody else. And whoever that person is going to have to enter the race soon, before the election, after Biden drops out. Who could that person be? We don't know, obviously. This is all just guessing. But we do know whoever that is will have to have two essential criteria. He'll have to be as shallow, ruthless, and transactional as Joe Biden is, and he'll need to have flattery skills that are so polished and advanced they'd be considered superior even in the Saudi royal court. And there's only one man in modern America who fits that description: Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, and perhaps not coincidentally, Joe Biden's new closest friend. "I am here, Mr. President," Newsom told Biden at an event the two did together last week. "I am here as a proud American, as a proud Californian, mesmerized by not just your faith and your devotion to this country and the world we're trying to build, but by your results, by your action, by your passion, by your capacity to deliver. I am mesmerized by you, Joe Biden." Imagine saying that as a compliment. You couldn't do it. Few human beings could do it But Gavin Newsom had no problem at all. Those words rolled right off his forked tongue. He never stopped smiling. So if you're looking for the leader of the coup, there he is right there. The most handsome people in Des Moines. Thank you for doing this.
No, it's a pleasure to be here.
And congratulations on your run. So as you think about running for president, I'm sure you think about the last election and what happened. Historic numbers for the current president. 81 million votes. 15 million more than Barack Obama. Twice the population of New York City more than Barack Obama. What do you think of that?
In terms of Biden?
Yeah. 81 million votes. They are saying that Joe Biden got 81 million votes. And my question is, do you accept that? And second, how do you think he did that?
I mean, all I care about is changing that. Like, we can't afford a President Kamala Harris. I will say that over and over.
Amen.
And we have to do everything we can to make sure that that happens.
But as a mechanical question, it's not a trick question, it's just like the mechanics of it, something you're thinking about since you're running. I don't think anyone would say Joe Biden was a great candidate.
No.
Didn't campaign.
He didn't campaign at all.
He was not a figure who commanded respect among Democrats. They made fun of him. I'm not attacking the guy, but that's true.
Right.
Nobody in Washington said, I want my kid to grow up to be Joe Biden. And yet, at the end, he's got 81 million votes. 15 million more than Barack Obama, who, whatever you think of him, was a very talented politician, and I think he was smart. So, like, how did he do that? And what can we learn from that?
Well, what you can learn from it is what we did in South Carolina. I said in South Carolina, if you've got to show picture ID to buy Sudafed, if you've got to show picture ID to get on a plane, you should have to show picture ID to protect the integrity of the election process.
So,
and we have to make sure election integrity is something we don't ever stop. You have to continue over and over. We've had some states who've done some great things and they've put voter ID in place, and that's been great. We still have some other states who haven't done anything, and we need to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to. I mean, we saw during COVID, a lot of secretaries of state changed rules without getting state legislative support. We saw a lot of that happening. We saw a lot of mail-out balloting. We've got to make sure we continue to fight to make sure we have integrity in the election process. Because I saw at the United Nations, when you have your people lose faith in an election system, that's the first crack of a country falling apart. We have to keep fighting for this. We have to make sure we get it done.
yes. So when I asked about the 81 million votes, you immediately said things I think I agree with about election integrity. So are you suggesting that last election, it sounds like you're saying you don't think it was on the level.
Are you talking about the presidential level?
That's correct, the presidential
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we all know that there were irregularities in there and that there were some issues that happened. We know that there was mail-out balloting that shouldn't have happened. Do I think that changed the results of the election? No. I mean, I think President Biden ended up winning the election. But I think at the end of the day, it showed we've got a lot of work to do in terms of election integrity.
So you mentioned mail-in ballots. Would you restrict that if you're president?
Yeah, I don't believe in mail-out ballots. I mean, if you do absentee ballots, in South Carolina, what we did is we did voter ID, we did absentee ballots, but you had to verify they were who they were. You matched up signatures. We counted them as they came in, so there should be no reason you're getting results 2 weeks out. That should never happen. And you have to make sure that people, and you have to keep cleaning your rolls so that dead people don't vote. I mean, that's a huge thing that we've got to do. And so I think we should always keep pushing for that.
So electronic voting machines, I think, are the majority of voting in America takes place on electronic voting machines. And I know that there are municipalities that haven't received access to the software that runs those machines. Why would that be, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I'd be happy if everybody just did paper ballots and then we were done.
Yeah. Do you think that that's, I think most people would agree with that. Do you think that that's something that governors should push for?
I mean, I think that you need to show the people of your state that they can trust the system. I always put a lot of weight in that in South Carolina. I wanted to make sure that every South Carolinian knew that we had fair elections, that we had verified elections, and that we were making sure that there were no dead people voting and no people duplicate voting. And I think every governor should make sure that that doesn't happen in their states. And I think that you also go a step further. Congress should also have oversight of election integrity to make sure if we have to change things. A lot happened during COVID. Learn those lessons and say, how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? I think we've got some opportunities there.
It doesn't seem to be happening, though.
No, it doesn't, but what has Congress done for you lately?
Fair. Wait, last question on this. I'm just interested, since you've been traveling, obviously you're running, all around the country, is this question, the question of whether the elections are fair, whether your vote is counted, is this top of mind for Republican voters in your experience?
I think Republican voters want to have faith in their system, and I think there's still a lot of questions out there. I think they're still concerned that those things that happened during that election don't happen again. And that's why I think governors need to step up and make sure that they're doing the things, and some governors have done a great job. You have the best governor in the country, by the way. Kim Reynolds knocks it out of the park all the time. But I do think this is a responsibility that we should have. It's a democracy. And in a democracy, you want to make sure everybody has their vote. But more than that, the people need to trust the government that is doing those elections. And so we have to go and make sure that they have faith in that.
One of the things that we've learned, thank you for saying that, one of the things that we've learned in the almost 3 years since the last election is that various government agencies, intel agencies, law enforcement, FBI, CIA, NSA, were involved in shaping public opinion about the last election. They interfered with our election. And that suggests to a lot of people that maybe those agencies have too much unchecked power. You've worked in government. What do you think?
Well, yes, that's true. You know, when I was governor, I went and replaced the heads of every agency. It's the first thing I did when I came to office. It's the first thing a president should do, is you control what you can control. And you start with your agency. So I replaced the heads of every agency. I made sure they were people, some didn't vote for me, but they were people who knew that sector. So if it was veterans, it was someone who knew the challenges of veterans. If it was tourism, it was someone who knew heads and beds, people on golf courses. They knew what they needed to do, and I did that across the board. But the second thing I did is I put people in every agency. I sent in teams into every agency to clean it up, pull down regulations, down old issues, get rid of problem children. So in some cases, we had to tweak agencies. In other cases, we had to gut agencies. If you look at the American people don't trust our intelligence agencies. They don't trust our Department of Justice. So you can't just replace the person at the top. You've got to go through and really look at gutting those agencies and getting out a lot of that senior management and things that happen.
I think it's a really good point.
More than that, you have to understand that every action you take matters. So I'll give you an example. When I was at the United Nations, my very first week, someone got on the phone with the press and told them what I was going to do. None of it was what I was going to do. And so I called my staff and I said, who is this? And get rid of them. You're not going to believe who it was. John Kerry's sister. John Kerry's sister worked at the U.S. mission at the United Nations. And I said, get rid of her. And they said, you can't. She's here for 6 more months. And I said, you take her key pass, you take her computer, and we will pay her to sit at home, but she is not to walk back into this building.
Wow. Well, then
you have to be willing to really do the things to shake it up. The next thing that we have to do is, I know presidents typically meet with their governors once a year. I will meet with my governors once every quarter with the sole goal of get the power that's at the federal government, push it down to the states. That's how you empower people, is pushing it down. And you push it down. That can be education, that can be health care, that can be benefits. When I was governor in South Carolina, we had thousands of people on welfare. I went, and instead of them sitting on the couch, I went to our businesses and I said, look, if you will take this person and train them, I will pay this X number of weeks, and then you decide if you want to hire them. We moved 35,000 people from welfare to work. I went into our prison systems, and I wanted to know how they got in, what we did to them when they were there, and what we did when they came out. We went in, we put in computer classes. We taught them financial planning. We gave them faith-based classes if they wanted them. But we put equipment behind the fence, and we trained them. Now in South Carolina, when somebody leaves the fence, they've got a job to go to the next day. We have the lowest recidivism rate in the country.
What? I'm wondering, I wasn't going to bring this up, and this is not something that you did, but I just was noticing it, that homelessness in South Carolina has risen dramatically recently, as it has in a lot of places around the country. it's a sign of obvious failure. If your citizens are living on the street and dying of drug disease and no one notices, then it's not working. Why do you think that's happening, and what can government do about it?
Well, first, that's your Bidenomics for you. I mean, let's make sure that people cannot afford things. And I'll tell you the one thing that's more shameful than anything as a military spouse, 33,000 of our heroes are homeless today. That's shameful. We should never treat our veterans that way. But you look at homelessness otherwise, and America has refused to deal with the cancer that is mental health. 1 in 4 people have a mental health issue. But if treated, they can live a perfectly normal life. The problem is, and you look at our veterans, 1 in 3 suffer from PTSD or thoughts of suicide. But right now, if you look at it, if somebody knows they have an issue, which a lot of our teenagers do and young adults do, they can't find a therapist because we don't have enough. There aren't enough treatment centers. If someone with a mental health issue doesn't get help, they get into an addiction. There aren't enough addiction centers. And oh, by the way, if you happen to be one of those blessed ones that gets it, insurance doesn't cover it. We have got to do this. We're losing Americans every day just because of that. And the homelessness is a lot of that. I saw that, you'll see in South Carolina, they'll take people that have mental health issues and they'll put them in jail for 48 hours. Or they'll send them to the hospital for 48 hours. That's not doing anything to treat these people and the challenges that they have.
Well, so what would you do if you don't send them to a therapist?
Well, we have to get mental health treatment. We should have telehealth all over the country, one for our veterans, but for people who need real-time help, they should be able to get a doctor on their computer or phone at any given time.
But there's never been a higher percentage of Americans on prescribed psychiatric drugs, benzodiazepines and amphetamines. It's the highest it's ever been, and SSRIs. And the suicide rate keeps going up. So is there a point at which we say, this isn't working, this treatment that we're offering?
Well, now you're talking about something totally different. I mean,
but that is the treatment for most
We
people.
have a broken healthcare system, and we have to make sure that we completely...
367 dzień temu go spotkamy za nami.